Hey everybody, what's going on? Helmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Tuesday and the patch notes for patch 7.10 have just been posted, which means it's time for another patch note rundown. As always, I'll be going through the most important changes of the patch and giving you guys a little bit of a heads up as to what you might experience going forward. Now, this patch actually has a lot of really important stuff going on and a lot of high profile champions being nerfed or buffed. So I'm not going to waste too much time, let's get right into it. First, I want to talk about a couple of big reworks that just came out. Hammerdinger and Rammus both received fairly significant changes in this week's patch. We're going to talk about Heimerdinger first. Right now, the biggest problem is he's too successful without any skill really being needed. You just kind of hang out in the middle of your turret nest and you win because your turrets are very, very good at protecting themselves and protecting you. The changes are intended to make it so that Heimerdinger has to take his destiny into his own hands instead of relying on the turrets to protect him. As far as that goes, he now has a new passive. He gains bonus movement speed while moving near turrets, both his own and the map turrets. Additionally, his turrets now deal less damage, the beam has less scaling, no longer automatically prioritizes enemy champions that attack them, and the beam charge has been significantly increased. However, it's not all bad news. He does have 3 turret kits from the start, so he doesn't have to max Q first if he wants 3 turrets. And the turret beams will be charged whenever Heimerdinger lands his other abilities. Each time one of his W rockets hits an enemy champion, it will generate 20% of his turret's beam charge, and whenever he lands a grenade on a enemy champion, the beam will be instantly charged. So if Heimerdinger wants the amount of damage he's used to, he'll have to land his abilities fairly significantly. His other abilities were buffed a little bit. W has a lower cooldown and a lower mana cost, and E has a lower cooldown and a slightly bigger area of effect. Additionally, his RE, the Storm Grenade, has more damage, so Heimerdinger will hopefully feel a little bit better about his other basic abilities. I think it's a bit of a nerf overall to Heimerdinger, but we'll see. It definitely makes him harder to play than before. Next up is Rammus. I talked about this with Gloves Guy last week or so in a podcast we both did. But anyways, Rammus is up for a rework because right now he doesn't have any decision making behind his abilities. As long as you hit Powerball on a juicy target, you're pretty much going to hit W, then E, then R, pretty much all in that order, and then you don't do anything else for the rest of the fight. So the idea behind his rework is to give him a little bit more agency and thinking a little bit harder about when and where he wants to use his abilities. Powerball now makes him much quicker, but it has a shorter cooldown, but it has a lower duration and is a channeled ability, meaning that enemy crowd control effects, like stuns, will stop it dead in its tracks. Rammus's W now itself slows Rammus, but it gives percent resistances while it's active. Enemies also take spike shells damage as opposed to just a reflected portion of the damage they deal to Rammus. And in that vein, Spike Shell was reworked, so now it deals magic damage to enemy champions based on Rammus's armor and champion level, as opposed to just 25% of Rammus's armor as attack damage. So it's a little bit stronger, actually. The reflected damage is a little bit stronger than it is before. E is now called Frenzying Taunt. Instead of reducing armor, it grants bonus attack speed for the duration, and the bonus attack speed is refreshed while his other abilities are active. So as long as Rammus has got his W going or his R going, he'll be able to keep the attack speed buff going, which can be fairly significant in teamfights. Finally, Tremors now deals less damage overall, deals the same damage to structures, but it applies a stacking slow to enemies it hits. So Rammus has to think a little bit harder about when he uses W. I should mention W can now be reactivated to turn off before the duration is over, and has to think about how he actually fights in a team fight. Next up, moving on to the parade of high-profile nerfs we have, starting with Fizz. Fizz has been really, really good, especially in the AD Bruiser build, and that's just because his bases are too darn high. So they're being nerfed. He's lost base damage on his W, but gained some ratio, so he'll feel better about building AP, and not so great building AD. Graves is being nerfed as well. He does a lot of damage, especially in the early game, and doesn't really have to think about using his ultimate early because of how short the cooldown is, so you can just kind of fire it off cooldown. So Q is going to deal less base damage, but it does have higher scalings, and the ultimate has a higher cooldown to compensate his weaknesses. Next up, I should say, not finally, we're far from final. Ivern is being nerfed. Right now he's too dominant in the jungle, he's just too healthy all the time, and he can always readjust his routes. He can't really be stopped no matter what it is you do. He'll find something else to do with his time, and he can basically always save his smite for invades because he never has to worry about sustain. So his sustain has actually been hit pretty hard. Friends of the Forest now cost 33% of his health instead of 25%, and it will also cost 33% of his mana as opposed to 30% of his mana. So Ivern will be much less healthy in the jungle and will be more dependent on using smite for sustain. He also lost a bit of movement speed, so he's not quite as effective at roaming around the map. Lee Sin is being nerfed. Praise be to Bard, this champion is finally getting toned down. For the amount of mobility he has, he also had an insanely high movement speed that made it so that even if he missed his Q, he'll just walk up and EU anyways. So to compensate, he's losing movement speed. He's down to 345 movement speed from 350, and his ultimate's cooldown was also increased. This is pretty nice. It tones down Lee Sin in a good way, and I think hopefully it will remove him from being a must-pick champion. Next up is Lulu. She does too much everything at the moment, and so she's being reduced to have her playstyle be more focused on her aggression in lane. So Help Pix's shield strength has been reduced, and her maximum health at level 1 has been reduced, so she's a little bit squishier and vulnerable to all-ins. I'm not a big fan of these changes. I think that they're taking Lulu in the wrong direction, similar to what they did to Rek'Sai, but we will have to wait and see how it works out in the end. Maokai is also receiving nerfs. He's one of the big tanks in the rework, and support Maokai became a thing following the rework. It's really kind of silly because his E does so much damage for no real counterplay. If you walk near the bush and the sapling runs out, you're gonna take a lot of damage. And he maxes that, and it actually does an obscene amount of damage. So Maokai's had some power shifted from his E into his Q. Q has a lower mana cost and cooldown, and it also has a slightly increased knockback range on it as well. Meanwhile, Sapling Toss has a higher mana cost, less base damage, and the enemy health ratio no longer increases with level. However, at level 1, it will have the same enemy health ratio that it had at level 5. Basically, it's no longer a max first ability. You won't get very much value out of it if you're maxing it first. You should be maxing his other abilities. So they're not shutting out support Maokai, but it won't be entirely based around throw E in bushes and wait for the enemy champions to get themselves killed. Finally, Sejuani nerfs. She was way too dominant following her rework, and mostly that's because of Frost Armor just gave her a truly obscene amount of resistances, especially in the early game. Now, she was hotfix nerfed in a previous patch, so she already has lost some power, but Frost Armor is being nerfed even further. Now the flat values of armor scale with her level. She gets 20 armor and magic resistance at level 1. I believe it's 70 or so at around level 7, and it goes all the way back up to 100 at level 11, I believe are the values. So Sejuani will be weaker in the early games and doesn't have quite as many free stats to rely on. Finally, two more things for you guys. Unanimous Surrender at 15 will be added in this patch. What this means is that at 15 minutes, you can throw up a surrender vote instead of waiting for 20 minutes. However, if you do at 15 minutes, it must be unanimous. Every player on your team must agree to the surrender or it will not go through. So if you guys are really getting stomped, you've already lost an inhibitor at 15 minutes, you can surrender that game. You don't have to play that out. However, if you are still doing well, and some players think, you know what, let's try to stick this out, you can still not go through the vote with one vote no. Finally, ping muting. We've been asking for it for years, but now you can mute pings from specific players. So you can mute their chat, and you can mute their pings if they're trying to question mark ping you all the time. So I think it's a good change, and a couple extra little bonuses at the end here. Anyways, that's going to be it for me today, guys. Thank you all so very much for watching. Go ahead and let me know what your favorite changes are in this patch down in the comment section below. If you liked the video, go ahead and leave a like. If you really like the video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it, and I will talk to you all later.